When U.S. visitors push the royal guards beyond their limits, emotional stories, royal guards. Karen had always been someone who loved adventures. Even as a child, she would explore every corner of her neighborhood, climb trees that seemed too tall, and wander down streets she didn't know just to see where they led. As she grew older, her sense of curiosity didn't fade. It only got stronger. So when she planned a trip to London, she didn't just want to see the famous landmarks from a bus window. She wanted to walk through the streets, feel the history in the air, and experience the city in a way that was personal and real. On a crisp morning in spring, Karen stepped out of her small rented apartment, feeling the excitement of her first day fully awake in London. The city smelled of fresh bread from local bakeries. The air carried a mix of rain and the faint scent of flowers from nearby parks, and the hum of buses and chatter of people walking along the pavements created a lively soundtrack. Karen adjusted the strap of her camera over her shoulder, ready to capture memories in ways a phone simply couldn't. Her plan for the day was simple: wander without a strict schedule. She wanted to follow wherever her feet took her, and somehow, that kind of freedom made every step feel like part of a story. She had a small notebook in her bag where she liked to jot down funny thoughts or things she noticed. Sometimes, she would even draw quick sketches of unusual buildings or street performers. Today, she felt like her notebook might be filled with stories by sunset. Karen's walk eventually led her through a busy square, where tourists from all over the world had gathered. There was a street musician playing soft classical tunes on a violin, and a few artists sketching quick portraits of people who stopped for a moment. Vendors lined the street, selling everything from postcards to miniature souvenirs shaped like iconic London landmarks. One stall in particular caught her eye. It was small, crowded with curious gadgets and trinkets, things that seemed like they belonged in a magician's pocket rather than a shop. Among the items, Karen noticed something unusual: a small, handheld device that looked like it could send tiny sparks when pressed. The vendor called it a novelty taser, but assured her it was perfectly safe and made just a little spark for fun. Karen laughed when she heard it. "I could take a funny picture with this," she thought, imagining herself pretending to zap someone like a superhero. Without thinking too much, she handed over a few coins and slipped it into her bag. It felt like buying a ticket to a small, private adventure, one that might be silly but fun. As Karen walked along the path toward Buckingham Palace, the excitement in her chest grew. She had seen pictures of the palace before, but nothing compared to standing on the street and looking up at it in real life. The gates were tall and imposing, gleaming in the sunlight, and the walls behind them seemed almost like they belonged in a storybook. Crowds of tourists lined the sidewalks, cameras and phones raised, trying to capture every angle. Everyone seemed to have the same idea: get a perfect shot of the famous royal guards. Karen carefully weaved through the crowd, looking for a spot where she could see the guards without being jostled. She was fascinated by their uniforms, the bright red coats, the black tall hats, and the way they stood completely still as if they were part of the palace itself. Their faces were calm and serious, and they didn't react to the laughter, photos, or chatter around them. To Karen, this kind of discipline seemed almost unreal, like they were statues that had somehow learned to breathe. She raised her camera and started taking pictures, moving from one angle to another. Sometimes she crouched down low to get a perspective from the ground. Sometimes she held her camera up high, capturing the crowd in the background. The palace gates glimmered behind the guards, and Karen felt as if she had stepped into a living postcard. Every photo she snapped seemed to tell a small story, her story in that moment, frozen forever. Then, she remembered the little device in her bag. It had been so quiet and harmless when she bought it that she had almost forgotten it was there. Curiosity mixed with playful energy. She wondered what it would look like in a picture if she held it as if she was about to use it, like a mischievous tourist with a sense of humor. She pulled it out and examined it closely. The vendor had told her it only made a tiny spark, nothing dangerous. It's probably fine for a joke photo, she thought. Karen carefully aimed the device toward the air, not at anyone, and pressed the button. A small, bright spark jumped from its tip. The noise was louder than she expected, and a brief, sharp crack made her jump. People nearby turned their heads, and Karen felt her heart leap in her chest. The device had worked exactly as it was supposed to, but somehow seeing it in action felt more real and more thrilling than she had imagined. She laughed nervously, tucking it back into her bag for safety. She returned her attention to the guards. They were still standing perfectly still, as if nothing had happened at all. Karen admired their focus. It was impossible, she thought, to be that disciplined in the middle of a noisy, crowded street. She wanted to learn more about what it took to be that calm, that confident, that unshakable. Her camera captured every detail: the shine of the guards' boots, the stiff posture, the way their eyes seemed to stare straight ahead even though the world was moving around them. As she observed, Karen's mind wandered to stories she had read about London, tales of history, kings and queens, secret ceremonies and old traditions. Standing there, she could almost imagine herself stepping back in time, watching the city change over hundreds of years. And yet, she was very much in the present, surrounded by real people, real sounds, and the small thrill of holding a harmless little device that could spark a tiny electric flash. Karen didn't realize how long she had been standing there, photographing, sketching in her notebook, and daydreaming. The crowd had shifted slightly, and she noticed families with children pointing excitedly at the guards, elderly tourists comparing their pictures, and street performers playing music for tips. Everything felt alive. Every face, every laugh, every movement seemed connected to her own story. It wasn't just sightseeing, it was being part of a living, breathing scene. At one point, Karen decided to step a little closer, trying to get the perfect angle for a photo. She adjusted the straps on her bag, making sure her camera was steady, and noticed the little novelty device again. She held it in her hand, thinking about the playful spark it could make, imagining a photo that would make her friends back home laugh. It was all in good fun, or so she thought. Little did Karen know that this small, seemingly innocent decision would soon lead her into a situation far more intense than she could have imagined. What started as playful curiosity and the excitement of standing in one of the world's most famous locations was about to turn into a lesson she would never forget. For now, though, she stayed focused on the scene in front of her. The guards remained statuesque, the palace gates shone in the sunlight, and the crowd continued to chatter and take pictures. Karen felt a sense of wonder and freedom she rarely experienced in everyday life. Every click of her camera was a memory, every glance around a story waiting to be told. The city, the palace, the crowd, and even the tiny novelty device in her bag felt like pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Karen felt that this day in London was already shaping up to be one of the most memorable of her life. She didn't know it yet, but the little spark of curiosity she carried in her pocket would soon ignite a chain of events that would leave her astonished, humbled, and wiser than she had ever been. For now, though, she simply smiled, raised her camera once more, and captured the world exactly as she saw it, alive, beautiful, and full of possibilities. Karen had been photographing the guards for a while when a playful thought crossed her mind. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small novelty device she had bought from the street vendor earlier. At first, it had seemed harmless, a silly gadget to make a spark for a fun photo. But now, holding it in her hand while standing so close to the iconic palace gates, it felt a little more thrilling than she had expected. She examined it carefully. It was lightweight, small enough to fit in her palm, and had a button that could send out a tiny, harmless spark. The vendor had assured her it was safe and meant only for amusement. Karen smiled to herself. She imagined taking a picture where it looked like she was zapping the guards just as a joke. It sounded harmless, funny even. She crouched slightly, adjusting her camera for the angle. The guards, as always, were completely still. Their black tall hats seemed to touch the sky, their red coats bright against the sunlit palace gates. Karen could not help but admire their discipline. She had read about them before, how their stance must remain perfect for hours, how they were trained not to react to distractions. And here they were, in front of hundreds of tourists, absolutely unmoved. Karen thought about how perfectly timed her playful photo could be. She imagined pressing the button, a tiny spark flying and capturing a picture of herself zapping the guard. Her friends back home would laugh, she thought. "They'll never believe this," she whispered to herself. She held the device in her right hand, pretending to aim it carefully, while adjusting her camera with her left. Then, almost as if the device had a mind of its own, a sudden spark shot out. It was brighter than she expected, accompanied by a loud snap. Karen jumped in surprise, her heart racing faster than ever. The noise echoed across the square, causing several nearby tourists to turn and look. Some gasped, and a few small children shrieked in surprise. Karen's face flushed red with a mix of shock and embarrassment. The nearest guard stiffened slightly. For a brief moment, his calm and disciplined exterior seemed to crack. He did not move toward her quickly or shout, but his eyes locked onto hers. Karen's stomach dropped. She realized instantly that she had done something more serious than she had intended. This was not just a joke anymore. She had broken the unspoken rules of the palace grounds, and the consequence could be serious. Karen froze. Her playful excitement vanished, replaced with a wave of panic. She could feel the weight of the crowd around her, the sharp stares of other tourists, and the calm yet firm presence of the guard. She wanted to apologize, to explain that it was an accident, but words felt stuck in her throat. All she could do was stand there, holding the novelty device loosely in her hand, heart pounding in her chest. To her surprise, the guard did not rush toward her or shout. He took a step closer, his posture still perfect, his movements slow and measured. Karen could feel the authority in his presence, but there was also something unexpected: calmness. Instead of reacting with anger, he seemed to be assessing the situation carefully, giving her a moment to realize the seriousness of her actions. Karen swallowed hard. She thought about how impulsive she had been, how a small, playful idea had almost turned into a disaster. She had imagined this moment as a funny photo opportunity, but now it felt like a lesson in responsibility. The guard's eyes were steady, unyielding, and full of focus, reminding her of how carefully they were trained to handle all situations. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out what to do next. Should she apologize verbally? Should she put the device away immediately? She decided the safest thing was to step back slowly, making it clear that she had no intention of causing trouble. She took a small step to the side, raised her hand slightly, and mumbled, I'm sorry. It was an accident." The guard nodded slightly but did not speak. He motioned with his hand for her to move a little further away from the gates. Karen obeyed quickly, feeling a mixture of relief and embarrassment. She had expected confrontation, perhaps even someone telling her off, but instead there was quiet authority, a controlled presence that demanded respect without raising a voice. As she moved back, Karen's thoughts began to settle. She realized that the small novelty device, which had seemed harmless and fun, had caused a serious reaction simply because she had not thought through her actions. It was a moment that could have gone badly, and she was grateful that it had not. She felt a wave of humility wash over her, a reminder that actions, even playful ones, could carry unexpected consequences. The crowd around her began to return to normal, though a few curious tourists still glanced at her with amusement and surprise. Karen wished she could disappear into the background, hoping no one would take her spark too seriously. She carefully tucked the device into her bag, making sure it was secure. No more playful experiments, she decided. This had been enough excitement for one day. As she steadied her breathing, Karen noticed the guard observing her still. Not with anger, but with a calm attentiveness. It was as if he wanted to make sure she understood without having to say much. Karen reflected on how disciplined and patient he was. For her, it was an important reminder that authority did not always need to be loud or forceful. Sometimes, quiet presence and confidence carried far more weight than shouting or physical intervention. Karen also began thinking about how easy it was to act without considering the consequences. She had simply wanted a funny photo, a playful spark, a moment to entertain herself and her friends. Yet here she was, facing the reality of a situation that could have been serious. It made her reflect on life in general, how often people act on impulse without thinking of the ripple effects. Sometimes, even small actions could have larger consequences than imagined. For the next few minutes, Karen quietly observed the guards from a safe distance. She tried to focus on their professionalism rather than her own embarrassment. She noticed small details, the way their boots gleamed in the sunlight, the precise movement of their hands when adjusting their hats, the rhythm of their breathing that kept them steady for long periods. She realized that what had seemed like a rigid and perhaps intimidating presence was also a result of dedication, practice, and respect for their roles. Karen felt a mix of admiration and humility. She had approached the palace with excitement and playful curiosity, but now she also felt a deep respect for the rules, the traditions, and the people who upheld them. This single spark, small and harmless in theory, had taught her a lesson in awareness, self-control, and responsibility that no book or guide could have provided. Gradually, the tension in her chest began to ease. The guard returned to his original stance. The crowd shifted back to its usual chatter, and the moment that had felt so dramatic began to settle into memory. Karen took a deep breath and allowed herself a small smile. She had survived the scare, learned an important lesson, and, most importantly, had gained a newfound appreciation for the discipline and professionalism of the people who worked at the palace. She decided to continue walking, slowly moving along the perimeter of the palace gates. Her camera was still in hand, but now her focus had shifted. She was not just taking photos for fun, she was observing, learning, and reflecting. Every detail seemed more significant. The expressions of tourists, the movements of street performers, the delicate shine of the palace gates in the morning light. Karen felt more connected to the moment than ever before. As she walked, she occasionally glanced at the guard, who continued his watch without interruption. The brief encounter had left a lasting impression. Karen realized that rules and authority, when executed with calm and purpose, were not just restrictions. They were guides that created order, safety, and respect in the world. She thought about how easily she had overlooked this principle in her playful excitement, and felt grateful for the chance to experience it firsthand without real harm being done. By the time Karen moved away from the immediate area of the palace gates, she had mentally committed the lesson to memory. Curiosity and fun were important parts of life, she told herself, but they must be balanced with thoughtfulness and awareness. Actions, no matter how small, carried weight, and understanding that weight could prevent unnecessary trouble. Karen took one last photo of the palace from a respectful distance, the guard still standing proudly in the frame. She smiled, not just because of the photo, but because she had grown in awareness, respect, and understanding. What had begun as a playful idea had turned into a moment of learning, a lesson that she knew she would carry with her long after she left London. As she continued her walk, notebook and camera in hand, Karen reflected on the day's experiences. She thought about the thrill of the spark, the tension of the encounter, and the calm authority of the guard. It was a moment of unexpected growth, a reminder that life often teaches lessons when people least expect them. And for Karen, it had been a powerful, unforgettable reminder. Karen's heart was still racing as she moved a few steps away from the palace gates. Her hands trembled slightly, and the small novelty device felt heavier than it had a few minutes ago. She had intended it as a joke, something silly for a photo, but now she understood how easily things could spiral out of control. The realization was sobering. What seemed playful in her mind had carried real consequences in reality. The guard, standing just a few meters from the gates, had returned to his usual stance, but Karen noticed subtle changes. His posture was still perfect, but his eyes occasionally flicked toward her, observing without hostility. Karen couldn't help but feel both nervous and fascinated. She had always admired discipline and focus, but seeing it in action after such a close call made her appreciate it in a completely new way. Tourists around her continued to snap photos, laugh, and chatter, oblivious to the tension she had just felt. Karen, however, felt a strange separation from the crowd. She wasn't judging them. She just felt that her own perspective had shifted. The small spark, the crackling noise, and the guard's calm yet commanding presence had created a moment she would never forget. She realized she could no longer treat her actions as trivial, even the small ones. Karen took a deep breath and slowly tucked the novelty device back into her bag. She felt the warmth of embarrassment spread across her cheeks, but it was accompanied by a growing sense of respect for the guard, for the rules, and for the city she had come to explore. She had expected reprimand, maybe even a lecture, but the guard's calm, measured response had taught her something deeper. Discipline was not just about standing still. It was about patience, control, and understanding the weight of responsibility. Still, she could not shake the nervous excitement that lingered in her chest. She decided to step further back, giving herself and the guard more space. Karen's camera hung around her neck, forgotten for the moment, as she tried to calm her thoughts. Every step she took away from the gate felt heavy, but also deliberate. She wanted to reflect, to understand the gravity of what had just happened. She found a quiet corner near a small fountain at the edge of the palace grounds. The soft sound of water provided a comforting backdrop as she sat on a low stone wall. Karen pulled out her notebook and began writing, her pen moving quickly across the page. She wrote about the spark, the noise, and the moment when she first realized the guard had noticed her. She described the fear that had shot through her body and the sudden clarity that followed. Writing helped her process her emotions. As she scribbled, Karen replayed the events in her mind. She remembered the guard's eyes, calm yet piercing, as if he had seen more than just the small spark. She imagined the years of training, the countless hours standing still, the lessons learned to maintain composure in every situation. The guard's calmness had not been passive, it was active control. He had allowed her a moment to realize her mistake without escalation. That was discipline she could aspire to, she thought. Karen also reflected on her own behavior. Impulsiveness had led her to this moment. She had acted without thinking through the possible consequences. It was a simple mistake, yes, but one that carried a lesson about awareness. She realized how easy it is to get caught up in fun and excitement, to focus only on immediate pleasure without considering the impact on others. This small incident had been a powerful reminder of the importance of thoughtfulness. After writing for a few minutes, Karen looked up and observed the surroundings again. She noticed families taking pictures, couples laughing together, and street performers entertaining passers-by. Life continued around her, vibrant and unaffected, yet for Karen, everything felt more vivid. The experience had sharpened her senses. She was noticing small details she had previously overlooked. The way sunlight reflected off the palace gates, the rhythmic steps of the guards, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Karen also reflected on how she had initially seen the novelty device as a harmless toy. In hindsight, she realized it had been a symbol of her own curiosity and impulsiveness. It was not dangerous, not really, but it had become a catalyst for understanding responsibility. She smiled at the thought. Sometimes, lessons came in unexpected forms. A tiny spark had taught her more about herself than a book or a guide could. Feeling calmer, Karen decided to observe the guards more closely from her safe distance. She noticed the subtle movements they made to maintain balance, how they adjusted their grip on their ceremonial equipment, and the rhythm of their breathing. Everything was controlled, precise, and purposeful. She admired the dedication required to maintain such composure, even in the presence of a distraction like herself. It was not just about standing still. It was about presence, attention, and mastery over one's own reactions. As she continued to watch, Karen realized that the moment had shifted from tension to reflection. She was no longer focused on fear or embarrassment. Instead, she was learning. Every gesture of the guards, every disciplined movement seemed to carry a silent lesson. Karen felt a sense of gratitude. The situation could have ended in scolding or worse, but instead, it had become a moment of personal growth. Karen's thoughts turned inward. She considered how she approached life in general. Her adventurous spirit had often led her to explore new places, meet new people, and try new things. But sometimes, she acted first and thought later. The spark at Buckingham Palace had been a small incident, yet it highlighted a larger truth. Impulsiveness without awareness could lead to unintended consequences. She realized that adventure and responsibility were not opposites. They could coexist if one acted with thoughtfulness. Lost in reflection, Karen barely noticed the passing time. The crowd slowly thinned, the sun shifted higher in the sky, and the palace gates glimmered under the sunlight. She felt a strange sense of peace. The initial panic and embarrassment had transformed into understanding. She had learned something valuable. Respect for others, awareness of surroundings, and control over impulses were skills as important as curiosity and exploration. Karen's phone buzzed softly in her bag, pulling her attention back to the present. It was a message from her friend asking how the day was going. She smiled as she typed back, carefully choosing her words. She described the beauty of the palace, the impressive guards, and her excitement about exploring London. She left out the spark. Some lessons were best kept for personal reflection. After sending the message, Karen stood and stretched. Her legs were stiff from sitting on the stone wall, but her mind felt light. She decided to continue walking around the palace grounds, camera ready, but with a new mindset. No longer was she just capturing pictures for fun. She was observing, reflecting, and appreciating. Every movement, every detail seemed to hold more meaning than before. As she moved, Karen noticed the small things that often went unnoticed. The gentle sway of tree branches in the wind, the patterned shadows cast by the palace gates, the way sunlight danced across cobblestone paths. Life was full of tiny, beautiful moments, and she had learned to slow down and see them. The earlier incident with the spark had heightened her awareness, teaching her that every action, no matter how small, could have significance. Karen also thought about the guard once more. He had handled the situation with calm authority, without raising his voice or creating tension. She admired his professionalism and presence of mind. It was a lesson she would carry with her far beyond this day in London. Discipline, she realized, was not just about following rules. It was about embodying patience, respect, and understanding. By the time Karen decided to leave the palace area, she felt changed. The excitement of her adventure remained, but it was tempered by reflection and awareness. She had faced a moment that could have been frightening, yet it became a powerful learning experience. The spark of the novelty device had been small, but its impact on her perspective was enormous. Walking away from Buckingham Palace, Karen felt a sense of balance. Adventure and responsibility, curiosity and respect, impulse, and reflection. They all existed together in that moment. She understood that life often presented lessons in unexpected forms, and it was up to her to recognize and learn from them. The palace, the guards, the spark, and the quiet reflection had given her a story she would never forget. Corinne smiled to herself as she wandered down the streets of London. She had come seeking adventure and fun, but she had left with something deeper, a lesson in awareness, discipline, and respect. And as she continued her journey, she felt a new sense of purpose. She would explore the world with curiosity, yes, but with thoughtfulness and care. Every step, every action, every decision mattered. And in that understanding, Corinne found a quiet joy that would guide her in all her future adventures. Corinne's steps slowed as she wandered away from the main crowd. Her heart still carried the echo of excitement from earlier, the sharp thrill of the spark and the intensity of the guard's calm gaze. Yet, she noticed a new feeling growing within her, a mix of curiosity and reflection. It was as if the city itself, with its history and structure, was encouraging her to think, not just act. She found a quiet bench near a small garden tucked beside the palace grounds. Flowers of every color swayed gently in the breeze, and a few pigeons pecked at scattered crumbs on the ground. Corinne sat down and rested her camera on her lap. She took a deep breath, letting the sounds of the city wash over her, the chatter of distant tourists, the soft hum of traffic, the occasional clatter of a street performer's instrument. It was peaceful, almost meditative. Corinne pulled out her notebook again, feeling the need to capture her thoughts before they scattered. She began writing about the guard. He had not reacted angrily or with force, yet his presence had spoken volumes. There was authority in his calmness, strength in his stillness, and wisdom in the way he allowed her to experience her mistake without immediate punishment. She wrote, "Sometimes the strongest lessons are silent. The guard didn't yell, but I felt the weight of what I had done. I felt the lesson." As she wrote, she reflected on the spark. In her mind, it had been trivial, just a joke for a photo. But in reality, it had caused tension, drawn attention, and reminded her that even small actions could carry significance. The novelty device itself had not been dangerous, yet it had become a symbol of curiosity mixed with carelessness. Corinne realized that life often presented lessons through small, unexpected events. The challenge was whether she could see them and learn. While lost in thought, she noticed a familiar figure approaching. It was the guard. Corinne froze for a moment, unsure of what to expect. Had he come to reprimand her, to report her to authorities? Her mind raced, but the moment the guard spoke, her fears began to dissolve. "Are you all right, miss?" His voice was calm, measured, and surprisingly gentle. "I wanted to make sure you understand the seriousness of what happened earlier." Corinne nodded quickly. "Yes, I understand. I didn't mean to, I was just curious," she stammered. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. She felt exposed, yet oddly grateful. The guard was not angry, but he expected her to reflect on her actions honestly. He nodded, acknowledging her words. "Curiosity is not wrong," he said. "In fact, it is a part of learning. But actions, even small ones, carry consequences. A moment of thoughtlessness can turn curiosity into trouble. Understanding this is important." Corinne listened intently. His words were simple, yet each one carried weight. It was not just a lesson about following rules at Buckingham Palace. It was a lesson about life. Every action mattered, and awareness was key. She realized that she had never thought deeply about the ripple effects of her impulses. Today had taught her that even playful acts needed consideration. The guard continued. "Discipline is not only about standing still or following instructions. It is about understanding responsibility. It is about knowing that the choices you make affect not only yourself, but also others around you." Corinne's mind turned over his words again and again. She thought about the moment the spark had flown from the device, the gasp of nearby tourists, the subtle shift in attention. Even though it had been harmless, it had affected people around her, and the guard, without moving aggressively, had reminded her of the weight of her actions. She felt a profound respect for his wisdom. "I think I understand," Karen said softly. "I see now that I should think before acting, even when I'm just having fun. And it's not only about me, it's about the world around me too." The guard gave a small nod. "Exactly. Fun and curiosity are important, but they must be balanced with thoughtfulness and respect. Life gives lessons in many ways, sometimes through books, sometimes through experiences. Today was one of those experiences for you." Karen reflected on that. She realized he was right. She had always loved adventures, often seeking new experiences without thinking too deeply about the consequences. Today, her adventurous spirit had collided with reality in a way that could have been serious. But instead of punishment, she had received understanding and a lesson she would never forget. She took a moment to look around. The garden was calm, the palace gates glimmered in the distance, and the crowd had begun to thin. The city felt alive and yet peaceful, full of possibility but grounded in reality. Karen felt that same duality within herself. She was still curious, still excited to explore, but now she carried the weight of responsibility alongside her sense of adventure. The guard spoke once more, gently guiding the lesson home. "Respect the boundaries," he said. "Not only the visible ones, but also the invisible ones. Every place, every situation has rules, and sometimes they are not written. Understanding and honoring them keeps you safe and helps you grow. Today you have seen this firsthand." Karen nodded, absorbing each word. She thought about the invisible boundaries in life, the unspoken rules, the social expectations, the limits of personal space. She realized that awareness was more than noticing signs or instructions. It was about understanding the world, the people around her, and the impact of her own choices. She felt a wave of gratitude. It was strange, she thought, that a near mishap could turn into such a meaningful lesson. The spark, the noise, the momentary panic, and the guard's calm presence had all combined into an experience far more valuable than any ordinary sightseeing memory. Karen smiled quietly to herself. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "Thank you for helping me see this, for letting me learn without making it worse." The guard inclined his head slightly. "You are welcome. Life gives opportunities to learn in many ways. Some lessons are loud, some are quiet. Today, S was quiet. Remember it well." Karen watched as the guard returned to his post, resuming his disciplined stance. She felt a sense of calm and focus within herself, mirroring his stillness. The lesson was clear. Curiosity was important, but awareness, respect, and reflection were equally vital. Adventure and discipline could exist together if she approached life thoughtfully. She sat on the bench for a while longer, thinking about how she would carry this lesson forward. It was not just about Buckingham Palace or a novelty spark. It was about life. Every choice mattered, every action had consequences, and the way she approached the world could create ripple effects beyond her imagination. Karen took out her notebook once again. This time, she wrote about the guard's words, the lessons she had learned, and the emotions that had accompanied the experience. She realized that the lesson was not temporary. It was something she would remember for the rest of her life. Writing it down made it tangible, a memory she could revisit whenever she needed guidance or reflection. The sun had risen higher now, bathing the garden in warm light. Karen closed her notebook, feeling a sense of completeness. The nervous energy and tension from earlier had transformed into understanding, respect, and calm. She knew that her adventurous spirit had not been diminished. Instead, it had been strengthened with wisdom. As she stood up and walked back toward the streets of London, Karen felt lighter, more aware, and more connected to the world around her. Every step she took was deliberate, yet full of curiosity. She observed the people, the architecture, and the small details of the city with renewed focus. Her eyes were open, not just to sights and sounds, but to lessons hidden in everyday moments. Karen understood something profound. Life often provided guidance in unexpected ways. A tiny spark, a disciplined guard, and a brief moment of panic had taught her about responsibility, reflection, and respect. She realized that she would carry this understanding with her in all future adventures, both small and large. By the time she left the palace grounds entirely, Karen felt transformed. She had come seeking fun, photos, and exploration, but she was leaving with a memory and a lesson that would shape the way she approached life. Adventure and thoughtfulness could coexist, and she now knew how to balance them. For Karen, that day would always remain special. It was a story of curiosity, surprise, reflection, and growth, a reminder that lessons sometimes come quietly, but their impact lasts forever. As Karen walked away from Buckingham Palace, the city around her felt different than it had when she first arrived that morning. The streets were still busy, filled with tourists, street performers, and the constant hum of London life, but her perception had shifted. Every sound, every movement, every detail seemed more meaningful. She carried the memory of the spark, the guard's calm presence, and the lesson she had learned like a gentle weight in her mind. Karen realized that the experience had changed her perspective. The novelty device that had seemed like a silly little toy had reminded her that actions, no matter how small, could have consequences. The guard's calm response had shown her that authority could be both firm and compassionate. She understood now that life often taught lessons in unexpected ways, and it was up to her to notice and learn from them. She wandered down a quieter street, away from the crowds of tourists, and found a small cafe tucked into a corner. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods welcomed her, and she decided to take a moment to sit and reflect. Karen ordered a tea and a slice of lemon cake, finding a table near the window where she could watch people pass by. The cafe felt peaceful, a perfect place to gather her thoughts. Pulling out her notebook once more, Karen began to write. She wrote about the spark, the brief panic, the crowd's reaction, and most importantly, the guard's calm and wise presence. She described the words he had said about curiosity, responsibility, and respect. Writing allowed her to process the experience fully, to understand the depth of the lesson she had been given. Karen thought about how she had always approached life with excitement and curiosity. She loved exploring new places, meeting new people, and trying new things. But she realized that her impulsiveness had sometimes caused problems or led to unnecessary risks. The experience at Buckingham Palace had reminded her that thoughtfulness and awareness were just as important as adventure and curiosity. She sipped her tea slowly, letting the warmth of the cup ground her. As she looked out the window, she noticed a group of children playing in a nearby park. They ran, laughed, and shouted, completely absorbed in their own fun. Karen smiled. Their joy was pure, but she understood now that even their actions had impact. How they treated each other, the environment, and the world around them mattered. Reflection and awareness were lessons that could begin early in life, and she was grateful that she had received such a lesson now. Karen's thoughts turned to the guard again. She admired his professionalism, his calm authority, and the way he had allowed her to learn without anger or punishment. It occurred to her that many people in the world carried out difficult or disciplined roles quietly, without recognition, yet their influence was profound. Respect for others, for rules, and for responsibility was a form of quiet power, she realized, and it had left a lasting impression on her. As she continued writing, Karen reflected on the way the incident had unfolded. The spark had been unexpected, the reaction from the guard had been subtle, yet the lesson had been clear. She understood now that life often provided opportunities to learn in ways that were not dramatic or loud. Sometimes, the quiet, calm moments carried the deepest meaning. And sometimes, a single mistake could lead to understanding and growth if approached thoughtfully. Karen looked around the cafe again, noticing the people around her. A young couple chatted over coffee, an elderly man read a newspaper, a group of friends laughed quietly in the corner. She realized that everyone was living their own story, making choices, and learning lessons along the way. Her experience at Buckingham Palace was her own unique story, one that had taught her about curiosity, impulse, responsibility, and reflection. She thought about how she would share this story in the future. Not the embarrassment, not the spark, not the moment of panic, but the lesson, the insight, the personal growth. She realized that life was full of stories like this, moments that seemed small or accidental but held meaning if noticed carefully. And she wanted to remember it always, not as a funny incident, but as a turning point in how she approached the world. Finishing her tea, Karen packed her notebook and camera back into her bag. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. Adventure was still important to her, but now she carried it with awareness and respect. She would continue to explore, to photograph, and to experience life fully, but with a deeper understanding of the consequences of her actions. Curiosity and thoughtfulness could coexist, and she felt empowered knowing she could balance both. Karen stepped back into the streets of London, breathing in the cool air. She noticed the patterns in the cobblestones, the architecture of the buildings, and the people passing by with a new sense of clarity. Every detail seemed connected, every movement part of a larger story. She realized that life was like a series of small sparks. Each one could create warmth, light, or even a lesson, depending on how it was handled. As she walked, she replayed the day in her mind. The excitement of discovering the palace, the playful idea of using the novelty device, the spark that startled her, the crowd's reaction, and the guard's calm and wise presence. All of it formed a chain of moments that had led her to understanding. She smiled, realizing how a small, unplanned action had turned into a meaningful life lesson. Karen thought about the importance of reflection. She understood now that experiencing life fully did not mean acting without thought. Observation, patience, and understanding were just as vital as curiosity and adventure. The balance between these qualities was what allowed a person to grow, to learn, and to navigate life successfully. Hours later, as the sun began to lower in the sky, Karen found herself near a quiet park. She sat on a bench, looking at the soft golden light reflecting off the trees and paths. The day had started with excitement and curiosity, but it was ending with calm understanding and insight. She felt grateful for the unexpected lesson, for the gentle guidance she had received, and for the opportunity to learn something important about herself. Karen realized that the day at Buckingham Palace would remain with her forever. It was more than a story to tell friends or family. It was a turning point. She had learned about responsibility, the power of quiet authority, and the importance of balancing curiosity with thoughtfulness. She had discovered that life's most meaningful lessons often come quietly, in ways that require attention and reflection to understand fully. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the sounds of the park, the rustling leaves, the distant laughter of children, the soft hum of traffic. Life was alive around her, full of potential, full of lessons waiting to be noticed. And she felt ready. Ready to explore, to learn, and to approach the world with a balance of curiosity and care. As she opened her eyes, Karen smiled to herself. She had come to London seeking adventure, excitement, and memories to capture with her camera. She had found all of that and more, a profound understanding of responsibility, reflection, and respect. It was a gift that she would carry with her, not just for this trip, but for all the adventures yet to come. Karen stood up, feeling lighter and more focused than she had all day. She walked slowly through the streets, enjoying the sights and sounds, appreciating the lessons she had learned, and thinking about how she would carry them forward in life. Every step was a reminder that curiosity and thoughtfulness could exist together, guiding her through new experiences with wisdom and awareness. By the time evening fell, and the city lights reflected in the Thames River, Corinne felt a deep sense of peace. She knew she had changed, not in dramatic ways but in the quiet, meaningful ways that mattered most. The day had been full of unexpected events, playful impulses and gentle guidance, and through it all she had grown. Corinne realized that this story, the spark, the guard, the lesson, would stay with her forever. She would remember it whenever she faced impulsive decisions, moments of curiosity, or situations that required patience and awareness. Life had shown her that growth often comes in small, quiet ways, and that the people who guide us can do so with calm strength rather than force. As she made her way back to her accommodation that night, Corinne reflected on the day's events with gratitude and joy. She had come to London seeking adventure, but she was leaving with insight, understanding, and a memory that would shape her for years to come. The lesson she had learned about curiosity, responsibility, and respect was something she would carry in every decision, every interaction, and every adventure in the future. And as she drifted to sleep that night, Corinne felt a sense of contentment. She knew that life would always present challenges, surprises, and moments that demanded thoughtfulness, but she also knew that she was ready. She had learned to balance curiosity with responsibility, to embrace adventure with awareness, and to grow from every experience, no matter how small it seemed. For Corinne, the day at Buckingham Palace was more than a story. It was a lesson in life itself. A lesson that began with a spark, a moment of panic, and a calm, wise presence. A lesson she would never forget.